Festival, protected by Dettol, Banega Swast India at the Darbar Hall. We are delighted to introduce Caste Matters with Suraj Yengde in conversation with Surinder S Jodhka. Suraj Yengde's explosive book, Caste Matters, challenges deep-seated beliefs about caste and unpacks its many layers. Describing his lived experiences, he brings to light the immovable glass ceiling that exists for Dalits in politics, bureaucracy, and the judiciary, while providing an unflinching account of the internal caste divisions within the community itself. In conversation with academic, writer, and sociologist Surinder S Jodhka, Yengde reveals how caste crushes human creativity and is disturbingly similar to other forms of oppression. We're delighted to introduce our first guest. Suraj Yengde is a DPhil candidate at the Faculty of History at the University of Oxford. Author of the bestseller Caste Matters and a co-editor of the award-winning anthology The Radical and Ambedkar, Critical Reflections, he is a columnist at the Indian Express, where he runs the only caste-centric column in the world. He is also a founder and curator at the Dalit Film Festival and co-founder of the Equity and Policy Education Initiative at Harvard. He's currently working on 3 books and 1 PhD thesis. Joining him is Surinder S Jodhka, a professor of sociology at the Jawaharlal Nehru University and fellow at the Centre de Sciences Humaines, New Delhi. He has published extensively, including Caste in Contemporary India and a co-edited work titled Mapping the Elite, Power, Privilege, and Inequality.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you for making it early in the morning. I'm really very happy to have this opportunity to discuss question of caste all over again with Suraj Yengde. This is the book that we were talking about, Caste Matters, right? The title of the book itself is a statement, and I think that's what we need to not only just make a statement, also in some sense it raises many other questions. I mean, why should it matter? Why does it matter? To whom does it matter, right? And why does it continue to matter and stuff like that? So I think I'm also a kind of professor and a teacher, so I'm kind of compelled to start this discussion by contextualizing the present moment in 2023. When we are talking about caste, we perhaps, in 75 years back when India became independent, I mean, most people would have thought that we would not require to talk about caste. 50 years back, only historians would talk about caste. That has not happened. I think that becomes important for us to, in some sense, look back at this trajectory or history of the category of caste. Not that it has just survived, it in some sense also thrives. And this thriving of caste needs to be in some sense contextualized. The way caste is talked about today is very, very different from the way it was talked about even in 1970s and 80s. And I think the most important turning point in what one would call as the narrative of caste, or the way caste is imagined and framed and politicized, comes about in the 1990s, early 1990s, when the Prime Minister VP Singh introduced this thing called Mandal Commission. And Mandal Commission let loose all the instincts of quote-unquote mainstream India. Many of you perhaps were not even born at that time, but those who were around, people like me, we were actually quite surprised and shocked at the manner in which the so-called mainstream, they included all kinds of people. I mean, they were mostly non-Dalit castes. Actually, some of the OBCs also did not realize that it was actually for them. And they were also part of these protests. And these protests were, across campuses, and everyone thought that it was end of India, it was end of merit, it was end of any kind of possibilities that they had for their careers. So it was such a cynicism, and somebody also committed suicide, and then eventually VP Singh government had to actually go. It became such a powerful assertion. And I think this was also a moment when Dalits acquired a new confidence. It was Dalit middle class people responding to Mandal that they began to talk about caste. It wasn't OBCs who started talking about caste as the official classification suggests. And why did they, and how could they speak about caste? And I think that's also a very interesting thing to remember, that by early 1990s, you have the emergence of a new middle class among Dalits who were poor, who continue to be very poor on the margins. I'll come to that in a short while. But there was a kind of set of people who were mostly office babus. They were beneficiaries of reservations, and we would talk about reservations in a short while. They were beneficiaries of reservations, but they also, in some sense, realized in the office that they were not being accepted as middle class officers. Even those who became senior officers, they were reminded of their caste by their fellow colleagues, even those who were subordinate to them. And they realized that, we need to talk about it. We can't really just tolerate it. And that's how Ambedkar, in some sense, comes back. And he comes back, in some sense, as the most prominent thinker of India in modern history, contemporary history, starting with early 90s. Everyone is talking about Ambedkar. The word Harijan is forgotten. In some sense, Gandhi is Dalit intellectuals begin to object to this framing of their identity as Harijans. And if we are Harijans, that means you are demons. So all of us are Harijans at some level. And I think that itself was a very interesting kind of new imagination. And conceptually also, there was a shift, very important shift. Until then, whenever we talked about caste, it was always in reference to Indian tradition that had been in the past, and if it survives with us, there's nothing wrong with tradition. There are many things wrong with tradition, but modernity will take care of it. Modernization, these buildings and cities and new jobs and media, that will take care of it, and we would not really be traditional any longer. And if somebody wants to live with their tradition, what is wrong with that? That's how caste was seen, in a very kind of innocuous, innocent manner, as if it didn't really create any problem for them. And that's the time when Dalit middle class people, individuals say, for us it is not tradition, it is violence. It is our marginalization. It is our exclusion. It also results in real deprivations. Materiality is not really only terms of ritual hierarchies. I don't care if you give me entry in the temple or not, but I need food. I need some space in the village. I need some dignity. I need to be able to get a house in the city if I'm an officer and I can afford that. So question of discrimination becomes a central question in the narratives of caste. So I think it is in this context that we have a new, maybe third generation of Dalit middle class, and they have also produced a new confident young men and women. I'm not a Dalit. I don't speak from inside, but as a scholar, I've been working on this and I've been observing it quite consistently for the past 30, 35 years. And it is in this context, I think I would start by asking Suraj if he wants to add something to the points that I've raised, and then we will begin discussion on other topics.
Thank you. Thank you, Surinder, for this warm introduction and setting the stage. Welcome, everybody. It's 10 o'clock in the morning. Even I would not have made it for my own talk. You have come. That's a great thing. Before I begin, I want to reverberate and recognize those people, since we are in Rajasthan, whose otherwise names and their legacy would not have found a place in a literary space like this one. I want to give and pay my respects to the Bhil tribes of Rajasthan, who were the most important force. Many empires, many kingdoms come. If it was not for the Bhils, there would not have been any Rajputana, Mughal, or otherwise empires. So it is to the legacy of the Bhil tribe. We honor them. I also would like to give a shout out to Vijay Singh Pathik, one a towering leader of farmers and somebody who belonged to the backward caste, what we call OBC. His movement regarding the rights for Indians, but more particularly taking on the struggle of farmers as somebody, an important source during the colonial times. Vijay Singh Pathik becomes an important icon for the Rajasthan's history. Let's also honor him by giving him a shout out for his legacy and for his people. I also would like to mention the great people of Rajasthan who are on the western frontier, who are divided by the borders, the Meghwal people, whose sacrifice and whose legacy remains cardinal to understanding. And I would like to also condemn the government of Rajasthan for their inability to control the atrocities committed upon SC, ST, and minority people. What we saw in recent months, where people here who belong to the community who are identified as Dalits cannot even ride a mare, even though they have resources, even if they have become police officers. This is the same wretched state that has seen murder of a 9-year-old Indra Meghwal, who was going to school, who couldn't access basic facilities, drink water, and he has been brutally murdered. And yet such incidents continue to repeat in this state. Setting the stage now, I would like to comment on a couple things that Surinder mentioned about the statement of caste matters. I think what I mentioned anecdotally is representative of how caste has been integrated into our lives. I argue in this book, caste in India matters to 1.4 billion people. It matters to everybody, but it's just not the reason for their deprivation and the lack of access to resources. It goes to 800 people, which becomes the matter of the dignity for them to survive. It goes down to 500 million people who are trying to claim a space in the Indian Republic when it comes to caste. And then when we go down to 350 million people of this country, the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, trying to live and bear the brunt of this caste system. So caste matters everybody in its surface. For some, it is a matter of privilege and enjoyment, but for many, it's a matter of shame. And for this, with shame, comes an absolute warranty of violence. So caste is no longer the metaphysical exercise that many people would offer a defense to. It is an everyday reality where people cannot breathe in the way they would like to. They cannot think, they cannot articulate, and more importantly, they cannot participate in the new republic that the India envisions itself 75 years on. It is the same country that has seen disproportionate over-representation of minority communities from India. The dominant caste communities in India, the Brahmins, are nearly 4% and less. The Khatris are even less. And if you go down to the Banyas, the so-called touchable communities of India, are nearly only 15%. 85% of India is someone that has been degraded by this caste system. So we are here to not only subvert that, but try to abolish and highlight each legacy in India, any spiritual legacy, any legacy that we have seen from last 2000 years on, was thinking and actively fighting against caste system. They came through different faiths, they espoused different ideas, but the primary modus operandi of each, be it the Nath Panthis, be it the Siddhas, be it the Sikhs, be it the followers of Guru Ghasidas, and so forth, all these believers were trying to rebel against caste. One of the reasons people are asking, and they were romanticize the idea, why are there so many religions in India? Because that religion, whichever was existing, couldn't suffice the needs of the poor, working class, peasants, people working in the field. And for them, they really needed a spiritual solace. And spiritual solace was offered through thinking about the social dynamics that exist amongst us. And each religion, whichever came about, rebelled against the fanatic caste system. And whichever what we call today bhakti traditions and so forth, traditions that we have from north to south, have been proactively engaging in exterminating caste out of our sight. And yet there has been still caste existing in the mindset, and there's something very peculiar. That's why I'm thinking about 21st century ideals of caste and how caste really regulates in our life, in our profession, and in maintaining our insecurities about others. Caste really is this divide where we don't really speak to each other. We really assume about each other. We really declare someone else's dignity, someone else's profile, someone else's ability just by their last names because they belong to certain caste categories.
Yeah, thank you very much, Suraj. And I think the point that you kind of underlined is the not only historical reality of caste, but also historically different contestations of caste. And unfortunately, for some historical reasons, in the 19th century, partly because of the way India was visualized, conceptualized, written about by Orientalists and colonial writers, and then introduction of census, but following the census also the way in which Indian nationalists began to imagine India at some level and then visualize the particular kind of narrative of India's history, which was again embedded in some kind of religious categories. The colonial divisions of Hindu and Muslim become very central to the nationalist imagination of Indian self as well. And it is in this context then caste, which is at some level a regional formation. Every region has its own caste hierarchies. Every region has its own jatis and upjatis or whatever they are, names that they are called. But everywhere you will find ascription. Almost everywhere you would find untouchability. The intensity of untouchability differs, but you don't find the structure of hierarchy being similar. Brahmins are not really very significant in Punjab, but that does not mean untouchability doesn't exist. Priestly castes are not there among Sikhs and Muslims and to some extent also Christians, because anyone can become a priest, but doesn't mean that caste goes away. So that's where a question of materiality becomes very significant. But this new imagination, the very idea of Dalit, I would like you to reflect on something more, let's say a little more on the very idea of Dalit, because it's something which is not as unproblematic as it appears to be. We all think that the category of Dalit is extremely unproblematic. In some areas, those who are listed as scheduled caste, because that's how Dalit is understood, they question, they don't like the term Dalit. Kashiram, for example, was vehemently against the use of word Dalit. But at the same time, historically, the word Dalit reminds us that there is a question of citizenship. I think that's where we should perhaps spend a little more time on thinking about Dalit as a category of the modern nation, as a category of the modern nation where substantive citizenship is denied to large number of people. And as he rightly pointed out, caste is not the only axis on the basis of which citizenship is denied. It is denied to, as he was talking about, Adivasis or scheduled tribes, but also question of gender and women. Within these communities also there would be hierarchies of gender and women. Maybe you can say a little more on this.
I mean, definitely. Dalit is a refuge for people trying to find the meaning of their life. It is a sanctuary of suspended fears. It's a place where you are embraced as one. You're not embraced as part of other. It's a space where the brutalized, marginalized, and a group that has been meant to enslave their entire life have found reason in other people's humanity, even though the person committing cruelty has not been able to find their own humanity that has been lost through this facade of how caste values entertained their own self, their own scriptures, their own families, and their communities. So Dalit really is a space that India needs to find itself in. It's not a space that it wants to exclude from it, because this is where you will be able to nurture the basic necessities that condition love. This is a space where you can share a fraternity, where friendship is a primary relationship, and from the friendship you can create the new avatars of humanities. This is where Sant Kabir thinks about how friendship is monumental to everything I do, and there is no Pandit and there is no Mullah in my thought. It is the other human that I do. And Kabir says, and I paraphrase it, if you're willing to hold my hand and walk with me, you are my man. Dalit is that space that is trying to find a co-partnership as we exist in this country, in this land. People have found reasons to deny a recognition that one is trying to strive for. And what is this recognition? This recognition as an equal, not as a superior, not as an inferior. It is to be an equal. And Dalits are someone who are the most non-violent people this epoch has seen. The kind of atrocities they undergo. Every third day, when Dalit enters a manual sewer and comes out as a dead body. Still today, Dalit women wake up to carry someone else's shit as their day labor. People are still trying to find reasons to deny that woman's dignity. And she has to do that job because she has no other job. But she is forced ritually to commit to that sinful job. And Dalit is still this position where we need to visualize how various identities manifest into its making, be it the queer folks, be it the trans folks, be it the folks from different diversities of religion and faith. Within this spectacular arrangement of this cosmology of caste, Dalit is the most tender, soft, and vulnerable space that everybody wants to rest their head upon. They're unable to find this place where they can really relieve themselves. It's a moment of goosebumps, the realization of how it manifests.
Suraj, very briefly, I was wondering if you could also comment on this whole, what one should say, paradox or dilemma of identity and annihilation, right? Ambedkar did talk about, and Dalits would be the first ones to want to come out of caste, right? Want to forget caste. But at the same time, Dalitness becomes possible only through assertion of identity. So how does one kind of come to terms with this kind of it's still a kind of question that is debated within the Dalit movement, but also there's a larger conceptual question, and it is not confined only to Dalits. Identity question, whether it is question of gender or race or other kind of questions of queer question, where people are trying to say that we exist separately. Our separation is difference, that difference needs to be recognized, but they also simultaneously are asking for citizenship status. So how does one kind of conceptually come to terms with this? Very briefly, and then we will come to a bigger question of privilege.
I mean, we have to understand that this is the same. There's an example in Telangana where, or rather Andhra Pradesh in general, where there are people who are bonded laborers to the landlords in the feudal caste system. And when a child is born, the child, until unless it starts walking, the child is meant to be in the custodian of the parents. As soon as the child is able to walk and talk, the child is taken away from their parents. And the child and parents will never see each other because now there is a separation. And what does this mark? This is this essential identity that the child is Dalit and his future is to be subordinated and enslaved for the rest of the life. Imagine the pain the mother must be undergoing while giving away her own sweet little boy, owing to this tenacity and monstrosity of caste where labor is not recognized. And in this framing of identity as opposed to annihilation of it, we need to come to recognize. And identity is more than throwing a grin at someone. It is about the lived reality. How you negotiate yourself in a world that is so much profit, that's so much devoid of their profit-making tendencies, still tries to create an anarchic system within ourselves. So for you to annihilate, you need to think that there exist so many groups, but we don't want to annihilate the groups. People have a deep anxiety when we talk about annihilating something. It's annihilating the structure and not the people. But people have assumed the character of that monstrosity as belonging to them. And that's where the problem of identity.
No, thank you very much. I think this also takes us to the next question. As you rightly kind of started with very interesting kind of anecdote. I think the burden of identity politics is invariably put on the people who are actually at the receiving end of that relational structure which produces that identity of assertion, right? It's the Dalits who are blamed to be casteist, while actually they are saying that caste is shaping our destiny. and we don't become citizen unless you forget our caste. So I'm not a Dalit, as I said, but I'm not outside the caste system, right? So, and as he rightly pointed out in the earlier discussion, that caste needs to be seen as a relational structure. If Dalit exists, Dalit can exist only in relation to non-Dalits. If Dalit category finds an appeal, it also finds an appeal only in relation to the idea of privilege. If gender exists, if women are talking about that we are also there and our identities need to be recognized, they are also saying that there is a privileged structure in which that is not recognized. That means the world belongs to men, right? And then obviously there are various intersections of it. It's not like Dalits don't have patriarchy, or minorities don't have patriarchy, or blacks don't have patriarchy. And within that, obviously the question of, and these are very, very difficult questions, we can't go into all those questions given our limited time, but I think it's important to also flag the question of what has come to be known as privilege, or the question of castelessness. And in some sense, it goes back to the way in which caste gets institutionalized in the Indian legal constitutional system, where you have scheduled castes as castes, other backward classes are classes and castes, but then rest of them are general category. In some sense, they don't carry the identity of caste, and they are kind of then whole question of merit and meritocracy, and the question that that we achieve because of our abilities and they achieve because of quotas, I think becomes very central. But at the same time, we now have a lot of literature which says that privilege has a tendency to reproduce itself. Anyone who goes into positions of power, they in some sense would work out systems. And this is a literature which has not emerged in India. This literature came up in France and in actually Western world, where the idea of modern individual emerged. So how do we, from a kind of, say, Dalitist perspective, look at the question of privilege? Maybe you can start with that, and then we can raise some specific questions.
Let's go to an office, everyday office. You will see a person greeting other person, Jai Shri Ram. You can see other person greeting Sat Sri Akal. You can see a person greeting Salam Alaikum. But you will not hear a person greeting Jai Bhim. That's the burden. A person, even if you achieve, you cannot really own it up to. You are living it with ensuing fear that even though you have achieved, even though you have become the bureaucrat or the person who has gotten into important offices, being a professor and stuff, you are still living in your entire life hiding. You want to normalize and you want to assimilate. The only aim of your life is for your next generation to forget everything that your social history has been. That's the problematic nature of caste, that it deprives the descendants of their ancestral history. It withdraws, it snatches from them for them to not rely upon it, to not look up to it, because every narrative is deigned, every story is demonized, and the gods that exist in certain religious canon here, and the demons and devils that exist in certain canon here, the devils of India's epics are Dalits and Adivasis. They have been reduced as demons, and they are celebrated as somebody who needs to be slain, be it Mahishasura in the politics of the goddess from Bengal, or be it the politics of Mahabali, the king of Naga India, of entire South India. All the stories of our ancestors have been taken away from us, and we are now forced to believe in the killers of our ancestors as our gods. That doesn't sit well with our, and so it doesn't become a politics of identity. It becomes a politics of dignity. And when it is a politics of dignity, it is the politics of community. Community is an central aspect of any society. In India, communities exist along the lines of castes. And that is why India is a caste country. It has not yet formed as a neutral communities that can celebrate and live with each other. Now, many a times when we think about the position of caste politics in India, it is always the marginalized that has to justify their existence. Why do I need to prove to someone my importance in society? You can just judge me by my work. Why do I need to constantly affirm my position without having to take an approval from you, who doesn't even want to recognize me as someone who is occupying this space? And yet, I have to negotiate my dignity on your terms. It's a very difficult terrain. And that's why the politics of recognition is essential. And the moment a Dalit recognizes, identifies, and celebrates their own self, their own ancestors, they live in the beauty of their foremothers and forefathers. The moment they galore, they identify with the richness of their past, that becomes a problematic statement for the caste society, because they are unable to deal with this self-assertion, because with self-assertion comes correction of the past. Indians love to live in the past because that's where they find the fidelity of a certain tormented history. Yet, when a Dalit is saying or reclaiming their ancestors, they have to do it in private. Dalits cannot be a public person. And that's why they found in Ambedkar an icon. And that's why Jai Bhim or Ambedkar becomes a canonical figure for them, who has, by the way, also written India's constitution. And yet, the constitution maker doesn't get a dignified existence and presence in India. It doesn't find a presence in public and private life. And that's why many Dalits or Adivasis in this case try to live most of the time life of obfuscations. They try to not become part of the ghettoized visions that they have. And so today, for us, if we are able to populate people from the marginalized caste into these spaces, we really have a reason to think about it. Or else, that's where the question of reservation becomes important. Or else it is just a hang on to something. And by the way, reservation just benefits public sector, which is only 7% of India's employment sector. And of that 7%, only 2.7% are actual beneficiaries of constitution. If you add OBC into that, it becomes nearly 3.5 to 4. Just 4% of India's entire employment, and yet there is a fear. You can understand how talented and how smart and how swagger and how dapper these people are, that even their one person there is creating a volcano, a threat to the entire caste system.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think, again, kind of, the question of community that you talked about, and I think this is where we need to think not only about caste, but also about India and perhaps the larger world. I think when Ambedkar was battling with the makers of constitution and also people who wanted to free India, and Ambedkar was not very enthusiastic about the freedom struggle. Though he wasn't against it, he was very keen that India becomes an independent country, but he was very suspicious, very skeptical. And I think that's the point which is being restated when Ambedkar talked about fraternity, that we, caste society cannot have democracy. And if it wants to become a democratic nation state, a constitutional democracy, it needs to get over caste. And I think that's where the rise of Dalit movement and in some sense its consolidation, including its weaknesses, is all proof of India's failure at one level, right? And that is the dream of creating a new community of Indians. And that's how nation state was also conceptualized by some Western scholars as imagined communities, that you forget all other identities and we all begin to see each other as citizens. That's where constitution becomes very critical, and constitution recognizes us as individual citizens. Everyone has equal right to vote. I mean, it seems like very, very innocuous statement, but it in some sense is a revolutionary statement. How can everyone can have equal right to vote? And this is something that many Dalit respondents tell me, you think nothing has changed. For us, lot has changed already. But at the same time, when one step is taken, in the next step they encounter the same reality of caste. And I think that's where we need to, in some sense, also raise questions. He talked about reservations. Reservations are available in three sectors. One is in institutions of representation, state assemblies, panchayats, and parliament, which was supposed to be for 10 years and it is extended every 10 years. That itself shows how little has changed in the caste system. Again, the burden is put on Dalits because they demand. They demand because even today, if they were to contest on their own, very few will be able to get elected. And I think we may perhaps already have some data on this. How many Dalits get elected to Indian Parliament on seats which are not reserved for them? I think we need to ask that question. How many of them have been able to recognize as leaders of India on their own as individuals? And I think that's where we need to talk a lot more about caste. The state needs to talk a lot more about caste, and we need to have massive amount of data. That's why we need different kinds of caste commissions at the state level, at local level, at the national level, and constant engagements with the reality of caste, which is again denied. Why is it denied? Why are they so much against a census of caste communities? Because the middle rank is missing, and most of the economy, I think that point that he made about reservation being only in the 7%, state sector is no longer 7%. 8% is India's organized economy. More than half of it is actually private sector, and private sector has no reservations, right? Universities and colleges do have reservations, but only those which are funded by the state, and their number is declining. Even when the number is rising, their quality is declining for sure. And you have the parallel private sector where there is no reservation. And if that happens, that would have implications for Dalits. So liberalization and privatization are very different and complicated questions. Some of us have done research on it. And in the corporate sector, it's not like caste is absent. In my own work, it very clearly shows that caste is absent, present by its absence. Simply because you don't talk about caste, you end up reproducing your own kinds. And that's how if anyone who is familiar with Indian corporate sector and look around, you would very rarely find anyone who is not like us in double quotes. So I think that's a very important question. I think we can say a little more about reservations. I think that is what I think in his book also many people think that reservation is what caste system is. Dalits are not really particularly excited about reservations. Reservation also is a source of various other problems. If you go to IITs and IIMs, many Dalit students who are very competent, they apply in general category and they would easily get in general category, but they are put in the reserved category and then they carry that identity all their life. And life on campus can be quite a painful experience in these institutions. Would you like to say a few minutes and then we can go to question answers?
I think I already addressed the questions of reservation and representation. I think what we could also do is to think about how and when does an oppressed express and when they claim their agency. I think when there is a congregation of ideas and a seminar of thought, should we centralize? And I think we should focus on those narratives. Let them speak. Let them be part of the conversation. If we are not part of that discourse, let us try to be somebody who can be in solidarity, because they don't have access to resources. And in many times, the lazy researchers have really put their own gaze of prejudice to undermine whatever dignified life that the oppressed is trying to find in this country. And when we talk about caste, we have to talk about definitively the privileges. Who gets access to spaces? Who gets to represent? Who gets to come to the festivals? Who gets to come to occupy the spaces where power is absolutely deterministic? We have to know that. And who gets to moderate the ideas that are regulated in generic spaces? Those are the questions we need to ask. And caste needs to start, especially the Savarna communities, should start by self-critical appreciation of themselves. Unless and until they do that, they will become a burden to the anti-caste space, because they will just quantify from a pulpit and yet reproduce their experiences by appearing benevolent. And this is what the problem of today's generation. is and also the older generation, I guess every generation is, where the knowledge is meant to be followed by someone and knowledge is meant to be created by someone. Why is this the gap that remains? And that's the problem that we are trying to tackle in our amidst. And people don't live in this grand ideas. What we need to do is we need to check each person and who want to be benevolent, and dominant caste people need to start challenging fellow dominant caste people about their caste privileges. And I think that's one of the ways we can create a space of anti-caste India, if we can.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have around 9 minutes for questions. There are already hands rising. We'll start with that woman. I saw her hand first. Yeah, please. Yeah. Stand up and then they'll give you the mic. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that talk.
Yeah, we'll take together.
Hi.
Yeah,
I
please.
would love to hear your thoughts about why caste matters, I feel, even more so in Indian diaspora communities. I personally, I'm not an academic, as I'm only coming into this from a lived experience point of view. I've spent the last decade in East and Southern Africa, and I often feel that caste matters even more so in those
Your question
communities.
is taken, I think that's
And
enough.
if I may ask one second part,
quick,
please. Very quickly, do you have a view on the implication somewhere of karma and on caste?
Fine, yeah. Yes, Samson, yeah. The person in black specs. Stand up and they'll give you mic in cap.
I think yesterday I forgot to, say that in my panel. Recently there was a report by Ministry of Labor which came out, and it said how, it was going to register the unorganized workers in India, and out of the 9 crore people who were registered, around 75% of them came from SC OBC background, and 92% of them live with less than 10,000 rupees a month, right? And after pandemic, most of these unorganized sector workers moved from the cities again to the villages. And so how do we look at these questions of economy and caste? And that is something that I want to ask both of you.
Yeah. Yes, the woman with the, yeah. Stand up with the specs. Stand up. No, the one in front. Yeah, stand up. Yeah.
Hi. So I'm a therapist and I moved to Jaipur 2 years back. And I think the overt casteism here really took me by surprise. Right now, I have access to a lot of high school students who are very privileged. So my question is that, first of all, how do I bring up this topic with them? And secondly, how do I become a better and more caste affirmative mental health practitioner without being, like you said, a benevolent burden, or without falling prey to the whole Savarna savior complex?
Yeah. Okay, stand up quickly. Yeah, right in the front. Yes. Yeah.
Hello, Suraj sir. Actually, Ambedkar get a scholarship from upper caste, and his teacher was also Brahman. But society always argue on Brahman. At time, 77 MPs from lower caste in parliament, and things are changing. But at time, different level facing more challenge in society. They are approximately more than 4 crore, but nobody talk about that, because this time caste make political issues, I think, mix up. Like a Tina Dhabi get reservation, his father get reservation, but they are not lifting reservation for upper lower upper caste.
Let's take more questions. We'll take 2 more questions. That woman in the corner. Yeah.
Suraj, can you talk to gender and caste intersection, please?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yes, this gentleman in the front row. Yeah.
Sir, you made an observation that we are demanding reservation of these MPs and MLAs. And we have never heard in our life that whether scheduled caste people or scheduled tribe people have demanded this reservation. What government does, they extended it automatically for 10 years.
Yeah.
But for other jobs, they are finding ways, they are reducing it. First thing. Second thing, as far as Ambedkar writings are concerned, what I feel personally, I don't have exact.
Yeah, please ask a question if you have. We don't have time.
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah, quickly.
When Suraj Yengde writes a book, it's not so popular. when Shashi Tharoor and Arundhati Roy writes, that occupies a lot of space here.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
accepted, yeah.
this is my second thing.
Yeah, Sting, yeah, that's woman, yeah, with raised hand, yeah, please. That's the last question, yeah. हाँ, कोई नहीं, but time हो गया अभी. You will not get time.
A very quick one. I think the larger conversation is we talk about institutions and all of that, but I think a lot of the non-conversation that happen at home is where it comes.
yeah.
So as a young parent, I have about a 7-8-year-old daughter. I really don't, I want to talk about her, I want to educate her, but I really don't know how, so.
Yes, please, last question.
Thank you very much for that. We had a small encounter in Goa. So I'm very pleased that instead of using the word Brahminical, you used the word Savarna caste. Thank you very much for that. My question really is, do we need some kind of an unconscious bias training? Just as we thought as white as being the background color, so we never talk about that color, do we need some kind of training to be in place?
I think we will not be able to take any more questions. We only have 3 minutes left. Yes, Suraj, yeah.
So thank you everybody for those questions and those proddings.
Closer to your mouth.
I'll try to club the responses to the best of my memory. See, I think what I would like to do out of this panel is that if the people who are sitting on the privileges of caste knowingly and unknowingly, realize or not recognize, to go home and see how their presence, their birth, their existence in their family, in their society, in their community, in the social circle they operate, really helps them advantage them and their folks. And once you recognize that and speak through numbers, what can you do to make sure that such undue privileges and favors that are granted to certain people, and which is your people, gets challenged? Can you become what I call in my book cultural suicide bomber? You are somebody with enormous cultural privileges and advantages. Can you become the one who will go into those spaces and become a suicide bomber of cultural privileges? Unless and until you start talking about this in the communities. And what we need to do is, when we challenge caste, you need to start challenging in our families. That's where family is a caste tutoring institution. Your parents tell you who to hang out with, what to do, and what time you can come and go back, and what areas you can spend time with. Now, I went to a school and I realized that my schoolmates would have after hours. I only realized after the school was done, I only realized that there was something like that because I was never invited to one. Because there was always, even though I went to a school, a good school nevertheless, the Brahman, Bani and dominant caste people would not want their wards to hang out with me. And this is the kind of teaching the family institution gives. In India, our love is deeply caste political. We don't love, we do love as a charitable experience to somebody who we think deserves our pity. We don't do it that comes out of our heart and genuine expression. For people trying to do something to become a good ally and good person in this, there have been enormous figures, and I'll give this example of Brahmin community who have been in the mission of anti-caste. They were the comrades of Mahatma Jyotirao Phule. They were the comrades of Ambedkar. In fact, Ambedkar's journal that was edited throughout, 4 people were Brahmins. In fact, they would call him Brahman Ambedkar, this guy who was. And Ambedkar would say at times to his Brahmin, one of the important key leaders, is like, there's only difference between you and us is you are born into a different caste, the rest of it. But what does the wretched Brahman do? They don't look up to their icons and ideals who are such, who made sure humanity was possible. They followed the suit of those who are murdering, who are killing, who are discriminating. Brahmins and Savarna community people need more human icons, more human parents, more human ancestors to rely upon. That will be the project of humanizing you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Just the final one point. Along with family, we also need to talk about marriage. I think that is where the reproduction happens. 90% marriages still are arranged. Perhaps 98% marriages, even they're arranged, they happen within the same kind of caste habitus. And even when we talk more about caste, I think the question about economy is very critical. Economic processes have their own independent logic, where marginalization is still kind of not being taken care of, or perhaps it is even increasing. And I think we need much more engagement with the reality of caste, and for that we need to normalize caste. That caste is a reality, is a normal reality like anything else, and we need to engage with it, we need to deal with it, we need to know about it. And when it is hidden, when it is concealed, and then it actually reproduces itself in a much more vicious manner. Thank you so much, Suraj. Thank you again for giving us time.
And with that, we would like to thank Suraj Yengde and Surinder S Jodhka for this vital conversation. Authors will be signing their books at the signing booth located just outside.
There